as usual. Let's get to some more breaking news right now. On the tense aftermath of the government shutdown, the House Speaker Nancy Pelosi just invited President Trump to deliver a State of the Union address on February 5th, a week from tomorrow. That's a week later than first planned. Pelosi nixed the original date because of the government shutdown. Let's go to our chief White House correspondent, Jim Acosta. Jim, there was a very, very rare White House briefing today. Right. Update our viewers on the very latest.
That's right, Wolf. And President Trump and House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, as you said, they have managed to get the State of the Union address back on the calendar. The Speaker just re-invited the president back to the Capitol 1 week from tomorrow. And just a few moments ago, the president, he did accept. So the White House, as you said, just wrapped up its first briefing in more than a month. That was earlier this afternoon as top administration officials announced new sanctions on Venezuela. Those sanctions aimed at prodding that country's embattled leader, Nicolas Maduro, to step aside. But the White House still has its hands full on the domestic front as aides are scrambling to prevent yet another government shutdown.
We have to have a wall.
It's as if President Trump has been hiding in a cave. He's largely been out of sight ever since he backed down in his standoff with Democrats over his quest for a border wall. And with just 18 days and counting before yet another government shutdown, the president doesn't sound optimistic, telling the Wall Street Journal the odds of reaching a deal to prevent another lapse in funding are less than 50-50, which is why top White House officials are warning the president is prepared to declare a national emergency so he can try to go around Congress.
What I do know is if they don't come back with a deal, that means Democrats get virtually nothing. That will make the president and force him to have to take executive action.
It's still better, John, to get it through legislation. That's the right way to do it. But at the end of the day, the president is going to secure the border one way or another.
Despite days of complaints from conservative allies that Mr. Trump was taken to the woodshed by House Speaker Nancy Pelosi,
she has just whipped the President of the United States.
The White House is trying to insist the president somehow won the stalemate.
Because the negotiations are still ongoing, and I would argue that conservatives that actually have influence have supported the president throughout this process. This is a simple fix. It's easy for Democrats to sit down and come to an agreement and work with us to get border security.
Democrats are already sounding worried about the prospects of reaching an agreement with the president.
I think the 35-day-long federal shutdown was completely senseless. I think for the president to take us back into another shutdown would be senseless. But the point of compromise is to not begin by saying absolutely no at this end or this end. It was the president who caused this shutdown by demanding $5.7 billion for a wall.
The shutdown appears to have done some political damage to the president, with the latest CNN poll of polls showing less than 40% of Americans approve of Mr. Trump's job performance. The Russia investigation likely isn't helping, with his longtime advisor Roger Stone sending mixed messages about whether he might cut a deal with special counsel Robert Mueller after the Nixon-era dirty trickster was indicted last week. Stone telling ABC News Sunday,
I would certainly testify honestly. I'd also testify honestly about any other matter, including any communications with the president.
And then today, just 24 hours later.
Are you willing to cut a deal with Mueller to avoid getting the case going to trial?
I don't answer hypothetical questions. I have no intention of doing so, however.
As he has with other targets of the Russia probe, the president is downplaying his relationship with his close friend, tweeting over the weekend that Stone didn't even work for me anywhere near the election. Another friend of the president's, former New Jersey Governor Chris Christie, is out with a new book, claiming that Mr. Trump thought he had put an end to the Russia investigation when he fired former National Security Advisor Michael Flynn, an assessment shared by son-in-law Jared Kushner.
I said, listen, Flynn's the only guy who spoke to the Russians, apparently, and he said, so, I think this is going to end it, and I just laughed. And I said, Mr. President, it's unfortunate that I have to tell you this, but having done this myself for a living, we're going to be talking about this on Valentine's Day, February 18. They laughed out loud, and Jared told me I was crazy.
The White House was asked whether the Trump presidency was somehow endangered by the growing number of aides and associates ensnared in the Russia investigation.
Roger Stone last week, Paul Manafort, Michael Cohen, Michael Flynn. Are you concerned, is the president concerned, that as more and more of his associates, former aides, are brought into this investigation, are indicted, plead guilty in this investigation, that this presidency is in danger?
Not at all. In fact, I think nothing could be further from the truth. The more that this goes on, the more and more we see that none of these things have anything to do with the president.
Now, we should also point out Press Secretary Sarah Sanders didn't really knock down the idea of a presidential pardon for Roger Stone, meaning that remains a live option for Mr. Trump. And, Wolf, we want to draw your attention to one other thing that happened at that White House briefing earlier this afternoon. John Bolton, the national security advisor, was caught on camera. A photographer took a picture of this of his notepad. He was holding this notepad in the briefing room. And if you notice in that second line, it says 5,000 troops to Colombia. Well, in just the last several minutes, our White House producer, Kevin Liptak, was able to get a statement from a White House official over here. That very brief statement in response to this question about what that was all about essentially said, as the president has said, all options are on the table when it comes to the situation in Venezuela. So a very interesting development that really sort of went over all of our heads this afternoon at the White House briefing. We obviously couldn't see that from the front row of the briefing room, what was scrawled on the National Security Advisor's notebook, but that very almost cryptic line there. It says 5,000 troops to Colombia. The White House not knocking that down as potentially being an option for the United States in dealing with this crisis that's unfolding in Venezuela.
Yeah, and then he said all options are on the table, presumably the military option as well.
Right.
Very significant indeed. All right, good work, Jim. Thanks very much, Jim Acosta, over at the White House. Joining us now, Democratic Congressman John Garamendi. He serves on the Armed Services Committee. You want to give me your quick reaction? 5,000 U.S. troops potentially being deployed to Colombia if they're needed to deal with the situation in Venezuela?
We always talk about the Constitution. The Constitution says only Congress can wage war. Is that what he intends to do in Venezuela? We're going to go to war in Venezuela? We don't know. This is something that an imperial presidency is what we're developing here in the United States. He wants to use his power to override the authority of Congress in the appropriation of money with regard to these emergency appropriations, now sending troops into Venezuela to what? Wage war, to change the government? We don't know.
He's sending them to Colombia, but what if those troops are needed to rescue American diplomats or American citizens?
Something to think about.
As Congress would not necessarily have to approve that.
Probably not have to approve that. But what is that? We need to understand what is going on here. This president has been out of control for his entire presidency. You just went through 15 minutes of the chaos of this administration, international policy. We need to settle down here. Obviously, we got to deal with this border wall issue. I will tell you, the Democrats are going to provide whatever money is necessary for real security.
I want to get to that in a moment. Let's talk about the breaking news.
Yep.
You heard the acting attorney general, Matthew Whitaker, now telling reporters he's been fully briefed on the state of the Mueller probe, and he says it's close to being completed. How significant is that?
Those are words we've heard for more than a year. We'll see when this is completed. I want a complete job done. I want everything that we need to know about the involvement of the Trump campaign in the Russia, what Russia did. We need to know how to protect our democracy. And furthermore, the Mueller investigation is just one piece. The Congress of the United States has to conduct open investigations on everything that's taken place.
Whitaker, the acting attorney general, also says that the decisions that were made are being reviewed as to what is going to be released to Congress, what's going to be released publicly. Senator Chris Coons tells CNN that is chilling. He used the word chilling. How do you interpret that comment by the acting attorney general?
Apparently he wants to hide the ball. I hope that's not the case. I want all of the information out. The American public wants to know what is going on. We're demanding that. Congress is demanding that. We can't rely on this attorney general. If we have to pass a law that all of this comes forward to the American public and Congress, so be it. Would the president sign it? Maybe he'll have to.
And would there be enough votes in the House and Senate to override a presidential veto? You need 2/3. That's not easy.
Well, let's find out what's being hidden, and then we'll see.
Well, let's see what the report, when they conclude the report. As far as Roger Stone, the president's longtime friend and associate going back for decades, the 80s, maybe even. Stone's indictment the other day has nothing to do with the president, according to Sarah Sanders, the White House press secretary, and only concerns his testimony to Congress. What does that tell you about Stone facing charges related to conspiracy?
The charges, at least as I understand them and has been reported, are very, very much into the conspiracy issue.
Well, he hasn't formally been charged with conspiracy or collusion. He's been charged with perjury and obstruction.
Well, I just said into the conspiracy issue. I understand there haven't been charges, but certainly he was in touch with WikiLeaks. Certainly there was a question in his emails and other information written into that indictment that would indicate that he was up to his eyeballs in what was going on at that time during that part of the national election process. So yes, there's something here. What does it all mean? This is why we have to have that out in the public. And if Mueller's investigation isn't made public, then the Congress of the United States will do so.
As part of a deal to keep the government open, would you support at least some funding for a steel barrier? Forget about the word wall, but some sort of extensive fence so that the president would be able to say he's got his wall?
Well, here's what I've said from the very get-go on this, and that is, tell us why it is necessary in that particular location. What's it going to cost? What are the elements of this? This is standard procedure for the administration when it comes to Congress for money. Why is it necessary? Why this particular location? What is it going to cost? Does the fence need to be repaired? Is it concrete? Is it granite? Or is it steel? That's of little consequence to me, but I want to know why and what the cost is.
You want details. Congressman Garamendi, thanks for coming in.
Thank you.
Lots of breaking news we're following today. Also just ahead, Democratic presidential candidate Kamala Harris is about to face Iowa. Voters were standing by for a CNN town hall event. We're following multiple breaking stories, including a revelation on the Russia investigation. The acting attorney general of the United States says he's been fully briefed on the Mueller probe and that it's now, in his words, close to being completed. Also this hour, we're standing by for CNN's town hall event with Democratic presidential candidate Kamala Harris. Our senior national correspondent, Kyung La, is joining us from the town hall site in Des Moines, Iowa. For us, Kyung, tell our viewers what we can expect tonight.
Well, the Harris campaign says the goal tonight will be very simple. The senator is looking forward to talking to the people gathered in the town hall to take their questions, to listen to their concerns. And then from there, the Iowa Democrats say that she had a very good launch, but they're now looking forward to vetting her.
So, let's do this.
Senator Kamala Harris making her first visit to Iowa as a presidential candidate on the heels of her official campaign launch in California.
I will lead with integrity and I will speak the truth.
Truth, a word she said more than 20 times in her speech as she called on supporters to fight for their vision of America.
People in power are trying to convince us that the villain in our American story is each other. But that is not our story. That is not who we are. That is not our America.
Harris laid out a populist platform, including Medicare for all, debt-free college, and a middle-class tax cut. While she never said his name, Harris made clear she's ready to take on the president.
When we have foreign powers infecting the White House like malware, let's speak truth about what are clear and present dangers.
In her hometown of Oakland, Harris packed the plaza and the streets. But even in this crowd, a reminder that the first in the nation caucuses are still a year away.
So she has a huge support, and but at the same time, I'm open to wait for other Democratic candidates who will be making their way.
Beyond that ever-expanding field of Democratic hopefuls, a curveball from former Starbucks CEO Howard Schultz, the self-made billionaire who built Starbucks from the ground up, tweeting this video explaining that he's considering an independent run for president.
Now, the word independent is just a designation on the ballot. If I run for president, I will run as an American under one banner, the American flag.
The blowback came swiftly on social media from Democrats, saying Schultz will dilute Trump's opposition, calling Schultz an existential threat, to this message from the Washington State Democratic Party on a Starbucks cup. Don't do it, Howard. A message echoed by Democratic presidential candidate Julian Castro.
I have a concern that if he did run, that essentially it would provide Donald Trump with his best hope of getting reelected.
And the Schultz announcement prompted this reaction from Michael Bloomberg. He tweeted, in 2020, the great likelihood is that an independent would just split the anti-Trump vote and end up reelecting the president. That's a risk. I refused to run in 2016, and we can't afford to run it now. Wolf, I am live here on the campus of Drake University. The Harris campaign says after the town hall, the senator plans to meet with students by stopping by at a watch party here on the campus. Wolf?
Thanks very much. Kyung La reporting for us. As the 2020 race is taking shape, There's a lot to dig into with our analysts. They're here. They're ready to share their insights on all the breaking news right after this.
This is CNN, the most trusted name in news.
We're following multiple breaking stories tonight, including a key update on the special counsel Robert Mueller's Russia investigation. The acting Attorney General Matt Whitaker said just a little while ago that he's now been fully briefed on the probe and that it's, in his words, close to being completed. Let's get some more with our reporters, our analysts. They're all here with me. Gloria, I'll play precisely what Whitaker, the acting Attorney General, just said.
You know, I've been fully briefed on the investigation, and, I look forward to Director Mueller delivering the final report. And I really am not going to talk about open and ongoing investigation otherwise, but, sort of the statements that I made were as a private citizen, only with publicly available information. And I am comfortable that the decisions that were made are going to be reviewed, either through the various means we have. But right now, the investigation is, I think, close to being completed. And I hope that we can get the report from Director Mueller as soon as possible.
Gloria, this isn't speculation. He's been fully briefed, right. He says, on the status of the Mueller probe, and he says it's close to being completed. What do you think?
In that small statement, he's told us more than we have ever known from Mueller, from the special counsel's office. And I think he got himself into a little bit of trouble there because he said, and this is what has Democrats in a tizzy, I'm comfortable with the decisions I'm comfortable that the decisions that were made are going to be reviewed through the various means we have. Well, what does that mean? Does that mean that he would be involved in the reviewing? Does it mean that you'll wait for the Attorney General Barr? Does it mean that he disagrees with some of the decisions that were made? Is he sending a signal to the White House? Well, maybe I don't agree with some of these decisions, but they're going to be reviewed. And then, you have senators saying, Senator Coons said that it's chilling to hear that. And lots of senators are saying, who are you to make this judgment? You're the person who came out and said that it was a witch hunt in the first place. And then he defended himself on that as well.
He's the Attorney General nominee, Jeffrey Bill Barr,
have seen actual deer in actual headlights who express themselves more clearly than the Attorney General of the United States did there. I have no idea what he's talking about. And this is very serious stuff. I mean, this man is utterly unqualified to be Attorney General. He cannot express himself about a matter of extreme importance, the Mueller investigation, and he has raised all these questions about decisions he's going to review. What is he even talking about? I mean, I think this is just a very serious matter that, some grown-up is going to have to clean up soon.
But what about Bill Barr? Is he the grown-up?
Well, yes. I mean, Barr, showed during his confirmation hearings that this is a serious person with serious understanding of the law. And at least for the good of the country, it seems like he can only be confirmed, sooner rather than later, because this Whitaker guy, I mean, I have no idea what he's doing there.
Yeah. Oh, no, I was just going to say, look, I sort of agree with Jeffrey Wolf. I have been on air right here on CNN with Whitaker. He's a nice guy. He's normally a very confident guy, but he was really hedging all over the place in that statement. As long as he's the acting Attorney General, it is up to him what happens with the special counsel's report. But I think that, yes, the nominee, William Barr, would probably be a person with a steadier hand on what to do next. And number two, I really do think this is a situation where if someone tried to suppress any material parts of this report at this point, there would be such a clamor, even from some Republicans, that the public wasn't getting to hear what the special counsel found.
But Rebecca, go ahead, Jeffrey.
Well, I don't know that that's true. I mean, this is an administration that brazens through things. I mean, I think, they could say it's a national security question. They could say it's grand jury material. They could say it's covered by executive privilege. Who's going to, what remedy do the Democrats have if they want?
Well, maybe Barr, maybe Barr is serious enough. And, the Democrats are trying to pass some legislation that says you have to give us a summary of this. But that's,
that ain't, Gloria, that ain't going nowhere.
I agree. That's neither here nor there. My big question is, was he sending a signal to the White House. Like, I'm confident that a lot of these decisions are going to be reviewed. Why do they? What? Why? What was he saying with
There's
that?
more breaking news coming in. We now have been told by Adam Schiff, the chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, Rebecca, that Michael Cohen, the president's longtime lawyer and fixer, he will appear February 8th voluntarily before the House Intelligence Committee. And Cohen says this, these are strong words: efforts to intimidate witnesses, scare their family members, or prevent them from testifying before Congress are tactics we expect from organized crime, not the White House. These attacks on Mr. Cohen's family must stop. Federal law prohibits efforts to discourage, intimidate, or otherwise pressure a witness not to provide testimony to Congress. That's Adam Schiff who said that about Michael Cohen and the fears that he had, why he backed out of testifying in open session before the House Oversight Committee. Now he'll appear behind closed doors before the House Intelligence Committee on February 8th.
That's right, Wolf. That's a very clear message that Adam Schiff is sending to the president, to Rudy Giuliani, to anyone else in the White House or allies of the president who might try to intimidate Michael Cohen, basically saying you will be breaking the law if you do. And of course, the next question is, well, then could the House potentially impeach the president for that? Could lawmakers pursue routes like that? And so Michael Cohen is going to have his day to say his piece in public to the House. It's going to be quite the spectacle coming just a few days after the State of the Union, now rescheduled for February 5th, with another potential shutdown looming later this month. And you can bet the president will be watching very closely.
Wait, is it going to be public?
No, it's going to be behind closed doors.
And we don't know what's going to happen with the Oversight Committee yet. They have been, as you know, Michael Cohen backed out of that because he was afraid, as you're pointing out. And don't forget, he's supposed to go to jail in early March. So we'll have to see what happens with that committee.
We've got some breaking news coming into the Situation Room. Very disturbing news coming in from Houston, Texas right now, where we're seeing reports of multiple police officers struck with gunfire. Our law enforcement analyst, former FBI supervisory special agent Josh Campbell, has been working his sources for us. So what are you learning, Josh?
Yeah, Wolf, a tragic day there in Houston. We're still gathering details on the extent of what is actually developing there. What we do know from the police union is that up to 5 officers have been shot in some kind of encounter there with the subject. The Houston mayor, Sylvester Turner, has indicated on Twitter that the suspect right now is down. We don't have any additional information about why officers were there and what actually happened during that encounter. We have seen footage of ambulances obviously showing up, as well as life flight helicopters. The nearest level 1 trauma center is not far from that location, but the helicopters being on scene at least signal that this is possibly a very significant situation with, possibly significant injuries. We're continuing to monitor that, Wolf. Again, we have no additional details. The mayor saying the suspect is down. We'll gather those additional facts and obviously continue to update on the status of these officers just as soon as we get it.
Yeah, the president of the Houston Police Officers Union says we currently have 5 officers shot, all on their way to the hospital. One is being life-flighted on the way to the hospital. We'll update when I can. We'll update our viewers on much more in the breaking news right after this.
Senator Kamala Harris, a live CNN town hall, tonight at 10 Eastern, only on CNN.
Tonight here on CNN, the first major television event of the 2020 race for the White House. Presidential candidate Senator Kamala Harris will join Jake Tapper for a CNN town hall live from Des Moines, Iowa. You're looking at live pictures coming in. She launched her campaign with a big event yesterday.
She did. And she, this was all very well planned. She has been to North Carolina. She knows where the early primaries are. She knows California's early. And she's in Iowa. And it was, I wasn't there, but the reports are that it was a great event with 20,000 people. And so she looks like she's on her way. Need I say, this is early, but she looks like a professional candidate at this point.
Jeffrey Toobin, she's a former Attorney General of California before becoming U.S. Senator.
What's interesting is that the Democratic Party at this moment has moved left, for a lot of people have, on criminal justice issues. And that credential may hurt as well as help her, because a lot of Democrats are concerned about the issue of mass incarceration, of over-prosecution, of charging felonies when they could be misdemeanors. And she is going to be challenged from the left on what is usually an excellent credential for a candidate for higher office. again, as Gloria says, it's very early, but that whole issue of how her career as a prosecutor plays out is one that we're all going to be keeping an eye on.
Former Starbucks CEO Howard Schultz is worrying a whole bunch of Democrats right now. He's saying he's seriously thinking of running for president as an independent, which could split that anti-Trump vote out there.
It could. The last time we had a serious third-party candidate was Ross Perot, who got 19% in the 1992 general election. That's not insignificant. I think that Howard Schultz probably has to define to voters why he's running not as a Republican or as a Democrat, not why he's running at all. I mean, the more the merrier, right? But why he's running as an independent with these worries that he will essentially throw the election to Trump.
You know, Rebecca, it's very interesting because there's apparently some thought of a Republican primary challenge to President Trump getting the Republican presidential nomination. Today, the White House said the president is ready for any candidate that would run against him.
That's right, Wolf. And his team has to be prepared for this. When you look at his historically low approval ratings during a time when there's low unemployment, a pretty good economy, his approval ratings, nevertheless, in the mid-30s. He is someone who is obviously very divisive. And we don't know what's going to happen with the Mueller investigation either. And so Republicans are kind of waiting to see what will happen. And it wouldn't be a surprise if there is a challenger. The question is, if someone does challenge the president in the Republican Party, what happens next? Because historically, those challenges have not been successful, but they do weaken the incumbent president in the general election.
What do you think, Gloria?
Well, you know, there's some talk about, for example, Larry Hogan, the more moderate Republican governor of Maryland in a blue state, being somebody who might potentially challenge Donald Trump.
John Kasich, too.
John Kasich. I think it's tough. I think it's really tough. The one thing that Donald Trump has done well is solidify his base. I mean, one of the reasons the shutdown has been such a disaster for him is that he started losing a bit of his base over it, over the wall. So he's good at solidifying that base of the party. And I think it would be a very, very difficult challenge, not impossible, but very tough to challenge.
But he got such great news this was such a bad week for Donald Trump with the Stone indictment, with the shutdown. Howard Schultz is a gift from God.
Exactly. Yeah,
He is a gift from God. You know, these guys, they're billionaires, so they think they can do anything. And, you know, and one thing he could do is hand the re-election to Donald Trump. And now he has the support of Bill Burton, one of Barack Obama's close aides from early in the first term. And the one thing we know about billionaires is they make political consultants very rich. So you can expect.
But you look at Mike Bloomberg, and Mike Bloomberg has looked into this, and he said, "Don't do it. I know everything about this."
Bloomberg, he'll run as a Democrat.
Exactly.
Everybody stick around. There's more breaking news. We're following President Trump approved sanctions against Venezuela as Russia condemns the U.S. response to Venezuela's growing political crisis. We're on live to Moscow for the very latest. And we're also...
This is CNN, the most trusted name in news.
Breaking news tonight, the United States announcing sanctions against Venezuela's state oil company as the political crisis in that country deepens. Let's go to our senior international correspondent, Fred Pleitgen. He's joining us live from Moscow. Fred, is Russia using the crisis in Venezuela right now as a way to try to undermine the U.S.?
Well, it certainly seems like it, Wolf, and the Russians really do see Venezuela in many ways as their sphere of influence and certainly continue to see Nicolas Maduro as a massive ally of theirs. It's in South America. One of the interesting things that they've been saying is they're actually accusing the U.S. of trying to meddle in Venezuela. The spokesman for the Kremlin coming out a pretty angry statement late last night saying that he believes that there was synchronization between the United States and the opposition in Venezuela. He said the Russians found it very strange. The opposition leader Juan Guaido declared himself the interim president, and the Americans recognized him shortly after that. So the Russians essentially saying they don't believe that the U.S. should try to exert any influence there. They're saying that that is dangerous. Let's listen in to what Dmitry Peskov had to say.
What is going on in Venezuela is dangerous, but what is even more dangerous is that it's happening upon the United States' direct interference. It's not just allowing it to happen, it's directly interfering. No one even bothers to hide it.
So the Russians essentially saying that the Americans are interfering in obviously what is very much the Western hemisphere that the U.S., of course, is a part of as well. The Russians not very happy about that. Interesting, though, we just learned tonight as well, the Russians, the Kremlin, are saying that so far, at least they claim, that between the Kremlin and the Maduro government, there have been no discussions for possible Russian military or financial aid to be going there to Caracas. The other thing, Wolf, that we have also learned from the Kremlin as well, they're trying to shoot down stories of the Russians possibly having sent hundreds of mercenaries to South America, to Venezuela, to try and bolster the security for Nicolas Maduro. Those were press reports that surfaced over the weekend. Also, the Kremlin, some pretty angry reactions to that. They are saying that that comes from the realm of conspiracy, saying it's absolutely not true. But of course, we do know, Wolf, that the Russians have been using mercenary forces in places like Syria, in places like African countries as well. So the Russians certainly trying to shoot that down. To them, of course, Maduro, an important ally, very important economic ties, and the Russians, of course, even having sent strategic nuclear-capable bombers to Venezuela not too long ago, Wolf.
A very tense situation. Fred Pleitgen in Moscow, thanks very much. And there's more breaking news. Sources are now telling CNN that the Pentagon is working on plans to withdraw up to half of the 14,000 U.S. troops in Afghanistan as peace talks with the Taliban progress. Our Pentagon correspondent Barbara Starr is working the story for us. Barbara, is there a deal with the Taliban that will bring the war to an end for the U.S. and bring those U.S. troops home?
Not just yet, Wolf. A lot of details to work out, but some unprecedented progress at this time because U.S. representatives are talking to Taliban representatives, and it appears there is at least a framework for some kind of deal to move forward. What the Taliban want is all foreign troops, including 14,000 American forces, out of Afghanistan. The Pentagon right now looking at maybe that very concept, withdrawing about half of them, 7,000. There's also an option to withdraw about 3,500. It all depends on what kind of security arrangement they can come to. The question is, will President Trump announce something at this rescheduled State of the Union address? The Pentagon knows he wants to announce either a withdrawal or at least a significant reduction. He believes that war needs to be wound up after 17 years. But the really uncertain question right now is the Afghan government. There has to be direct talks, in the U.S. view, between the Taliban and the Afghans. There has to be security guarantees. And what kind of role, if any, would the U.S. be left with to continue to conduct counterterrorism missions, to go after al-Qaeda, to go after ISIS in Afghanistan? So a lot of open questions, but very significant progress that U.S. representatives are saying there's a framework deal, but still a lot to be decided. Wolf?
Yeah, still 14,000 U.S. troops in Afghanistan, still almost 2,000 U.S. troops in Syria, 5,000 U.S. troops in Iraq. I assume that if the president had his way, he would bring all of those troops home to the United States as quickly as possible. He wants those troops back here in the United States. We'll watch this story develop. Lots of significance there. Barbara Starr at the Pentagon, thanks very much. And to our viewers, thanks very much for watching. Jim Acosta standing by. Jim, the White House receives an invitation from the Hill and sends out a tough message to Venezuela.
That's right, Wolf. President Trump and House Speaker Nancy Pelosi may be moving closer to getting a State of the Union address back on the calendar. The Speaker just re-invited the president back to the Capitol 1 week from tomorrow. No word just yet as to whether the White House and the president have accepted that offer. The White House, meanwhile, just wrapped up its first briefing, as you said, in more than a month as top administration officials announced new sanctions on Venezuela aimed at prodding that country's embattled leader, Nicolas Maduro, to step aside. But the White House has its hands full these days as aides are scrambling to prevent yet another government shutdown.
We have to have a wall.
It's as if President Trump has been hiding in a cave. He's largely been out of sight ever since he backed down in a standoff with Democrats over his quest for a border wall. And with just 18 days and counting before yet another government shutdown, the president doesn't sound optimistic, telling the Wall Street Journal the odds of reaching a deal to prevent another lapse in funding are less than 50-50, which is why top White House officials are warning the president is prepared to declare a national emergency so he can try to go around Congress.
What I do know is if they don't come back with a deal, that means Democrats get virtually nothing. That will make the president and force him to have to take executive action.
It's still better, John, to get it through legislation. That's the right way to do it. But at the end of the day, the president is going to secure the border one way or another.
Despite days of complaints from conservative allies that Mr. Trump was taken to the woodshed by House Speaker Nancy Pelosi,
She has just whipped
the President of the United States. The White House is trying to insist the president somehow won the stalemate.
Because the negotiations are still ongoing, and I would argue that conservatives that actually have influence have supported the president throughout this process. This is a simple fix. It's easy for Democrats to sit down and come to an agreement and work with us to get border security.
Democrats are already sounding worried about the prospects of reaching an agreement with the president.
I think the 35-day-long federal shutdown was completely senseless. I think for the president to take us back into another shutdown would be senseless. But the point of compromise is to not begin by saying absolutely no at this end or this end. It was the president who caused this shutdown by demanding $5.7 billion for a wall.
The shutdown appears to have done some political damage to the president, with the latest CNN poll of polls showing less than 40% of Americans approve of Mr. Trump's job performance. The Russia investigation likely isn't helping, with his longtime advisor Roger Stone sending mixed messages about whether he might cut a deal with special counsel Robert Mueller after the Nixon-era dirty trickster was indicted last week. Stone telling ABC News Sunday,
I would certainly testify honestly. I'd also testify honestly about any other matter, including any communications with the president.
And then today, just 24 hours later.
Are you willing to cut a deal with Mueller to avoid getting the case going to trial?
I don't answer hypothetical questions. I have no intention of doing so, however.
As he has with other targets of the Russia probe, the president is downplaying his relationship with his close friend, tweeting over the weekend that Stone didn't even work for me anywhere near the election. Another friend of the president's, former New Jersey Governor Chris Christie, is out with a new book, claiming that Mr. Trump thought he had put an end to the Russia investigation when he fired former National Security Advisor Michael Flynn, an assessment shared by son-in-law Jared Kushner. Christie writes he told the president, "Sir, I said, this Russia thing is far from over." The president responded, "What do you mean? Flynn met with the Russians. That was the problem. I fired Flynn. It's over." Kushner added, "That's right. Firing Flynn ends the whole Russia thing." The White House was asked whether the Trump presidency was somehow endangered by the growing number of aides and associates ensnared in the Russia investigation.
Roger Stone last week, Paul Manafort, Michael Cohen, Michael Flynn. Are you concerned, is the president concerned, that as more and more of his associates, former aides, are brought into this investigation, are indicted, plead guilty in this investigation, that this presidency is in danger?
Not at all. In fact, I think nothing could be further from the truth. The more that this goes on, the more and more we see that none of these things have anything to do with the president.
One thing we should also know, Press Secretary Sarah Sanders did not really knock down the idea of a presidential pardon for Roger Stone, meaning that remains a live option for Mr. Trump. And today's White House briefing was the first in 41 days. How long is that? It was so long, we never had one during what was the longest government shutdown in American history. And as for the shutdown, the Congressional Budget Office estimates that came at a cost of $11 billion to the U.S. economy. That's more than what the president was demanding for his border wall. But not surprisingly, Wolf, White House officials at that briefing earlier today were disputing those numbers coming out of Congress.
Not
Wolf.
surprisingly at all. All right, Jim Acosta, thank you very much. Just days after longtime Trump ally Roger Stone was indicted in Mueller's Russia probe and arrested in an FBI raid, the White House won't, as we just heard, flatly rule out a pardon for Stone or say whether the president had any interaction with him about WikiLeaks. Let's bring in our senior justice correspondent, Evan Perez. Evan, is Stone, first of all, signaling for a pardon?
Look, I think what Roger Stone is doing is making sure that he stays in the good graces of the president for just that reason. I think Roger Stone says he has no plans to turn on the president. He says there's nothing to turn on the president about, and he's keeping to that story. So even though obviously we've seen many other people, including Paul Manafort, who have gotten into these legal problems because of the Russia investigation. Roger Stone is obviously one of the crucial figures in this investigation, and you can bet that if there are going to be pardons that are going to be doled out, his name would be right at the top of the list.
What should we expect tomorrow when Stone is formally arraigned at a D.C. federal court?
Well, he's going to hear the charges that are. This is the first time he's appearing here before a D.C. magistrate here in Washington, where he would presumably go on trial. Now, we don't know whether Roger Stone, as you've seen mixed messages from him over the last couple of days, he says he would cooperate with the Mueller investigation. And then this morning he seemed to say that he has no plans to cooperate. So I think we're going to hear a little bit more from Roger, as Roger tends to do. I think he's going to have his chance at the cameras tomorrow here at the D.C. court. And we'll see how long this show can go on, because, Wolf, you know that these judges here in D.C. are not really big fans of defendants holding press conferences and so on. So let's see how long this show goes on from Roger Stone.
Yeah, that's a very important point. We know the FBI raided his home, Stone's homes, and now we've learned they've also raided his storage facility in Florida. What does that tell you?
Well, it shows you how thorough they're being, as you said, leaving no stone unturned to try to get a hold of any records there are. Now, we know, Wolf, that as recently as just, in the fall, the Mueller team had reached out to the president's team to try to get any records of Roger Stone visiting Trump Tower, phone records. So we know that even in the last few months, they've been trying to gather up records of any contacts between Roger Stone, people in the campaign, and the president himself. So is there something in that storage facility that may point to some of those unanswered questions that we all have, the prosecutors may still have? I think that's the key there.
Yeah, that's a good point as well. All right, thanks very much, Evan, for that. Joining us now, Democratic Senator Mazie Hirono of Hawaii. She's a member of both the Judiciary and the Armed Services Committees. Senator, thanks so much for joining us.
Certainly.
So let's begin with the breaking news. The House Speaker Nancy Pelosi has now formally invited President Trump to deliver his State of the Union address on February 5th, a week from tomorrow. That's a week later than originally scheduled. Do you think it was a good idea for the Speaker to make that offer while the President is still threatening to shut down the government again if lawmakers can't come up with a border security deal?
Well, she made her offer. I think she's being very gracious. I personally would have preferred that he give his State of the Union's remarks after we keep government running at least to the end of the fiscal year. But I certainly support Nancy and what she does.
Are you surprised that she made this invitation as she did?
I think she probably doesn't want this particular aspect of the whole terrible shutdown to continue to be focused. We should be focusing now on how to make sure that government keeps running until the end of the fiscal year. And I hope that the committee, the Joint Committee, will be able to come up with a border security proposal that we can support. And the only person who keeps talking about a wall basically is the president. So again, I reiterate that if this Joint Committee can come up with good border security, which Democrats and Republicans support, that we should pass the legislation and the president can veto it if that's what he wants to do, and we should override his veto.
Would you support any bill that includes funding for a border wall with Mexico?
I support, and I have supported, proposals that would ensure border security, and part of that includes fixing the walls that are needing to be fixed, etc. But when we talk about border security, it means much more than what's going on with the border. It, of course, includes what's happening in our ports, which is where most of the drugs come in. So it has to be much more of a total aspect of how to ensure our security at our borders and ports, not just totally focusing on the wall in some sort of a, I don't know, the president really is so adamant about it that I'm afraid that he will contemplate another shutdown. In fact, it's appalling that after 35 days of tremendous harm to not just the federal employees, but all the contractors, as well as, by the way, the $11 billion lost to our national economy, which will not be recovered. It's appalling that he still thinks that maybe we can have another shutdown so he can get his vanity wall.
We've got some breaking news, Senator, and I want to inform you and our viewers of what's going on. It involves the Russia investigation, and we're just now learning that the acting Attorney General, Matt Whitaker, has just said that he's been fully briefed on the Mueller investigation, and the investigation, in his words, and I'm quoting now, is close to being completed. Close to being completed. Your reaction?
Well, for one thing, I don't think that Whitaker should even be the acting Attorney General. I'm part of a lawsuit to say that he should have been confirmed. So he is a total Trump supporter, and I'm very cautious about anything that he has to say. This just points out how important it is for the Mueller investigation to proceed. And by the way, the next person who's coming up for Attorney General is Barr, who has said that he doesn't think that Mueller should be looking into any obstruction of justice claims against the president. So in the coming Attorney General, we have somebody else who is looking, it seems to me, to limit the Mueller investigation. So once again, Mitch McConnell should bring the bill that would protect Mueller investigation to the floor of the Senate.
Senator, I want you to stand by for a moment. Our justice correspondent, Laura Jarrett, was at this briefing with the acting attorney general. So be precise, Laura. Tell our viewers about the breaking news. Tell our viewers what he said, because he's giving the first really public indication that this Mueller investigation is getting close to an end.
That's right, Wolf. Some news out of the Justice Department today at a completely different case related to Huawei indictments against that big tech firm. The acting attorney general revealed that the special counsel is close to being completed with his investigation. And he also said that he has been fully briefed on the investigation, the first indication that we really received today about what has happened since he has overseen the investigation as the acting attorney general since early November, when Attorney General Jeff Sessions was ousted. Of course, we all remember the day after the election. But we haven't known exactly what Whitaker's role has been, except for the formal role overseeing the investigation. Obviously, the Deputy Attorney General, Rod Rosenstein, is the man we all think of as being in charge, managing the investigation day to day. But Whitaker did confirm today, Wolf, that he has been fully briefed on the investigation and said that he looks forward to seeing a report from Mueller and that it is close to being completed. He did not go any further than that when pressed, obviously, but he held all of our attention at those words, Wolf, the first we've heard of it.
I think you probably have it as well. Let me read it to our viewers. The precise words, this is very significant, and Senator Hirono is standing by. Let me read to you what the acting attorney general said. I've been fully briefed on the investigation. I look forward to Director Mueller delivering the final report. I really am not going to talk about open, ongoing investigations otherwise, but sort of the statements I made were as a private citizen only with publicly available information. And I am comfortable that the decisions that were made are going to be reviewed through the various means we have. But right now, the investigation is, I think, close to being completed, and I hope that we can get the report from Director Mueller as soon as possible. Tell our viewers, Laura, why he decided to speak publicly on the state of the Mueller investigation.
Well, it's interesting, Wolf. We weren't sure exactly what he would say. This is the first we have heard from Whitaker since he assumed the role of acting attorney general. And we weren't sure he was actually going to take questions at all, as usually sometimes Justice Department officials, at least in the past couple months, have gotten up there and departed shortly after. But he stayed for a while taking questions on a variety of issues, did not shy away from anything related to the Mueller investigation. But the real question is whether it's even going to be up to him, as of course the president has nominated Bill Barr to be the permanent attorney general, and he's scheduled for a vote early next month, I should say, in the Senate Judiciary Committee. So this may not be up to Whitaker at all, what happens with the Mueller investigation, but for now, he does still technically oversee it. So anything, of course, that he says about it or as he weighs in on it is certainly significant.
Certainly is significant because he says he has been briefed on the state of the Mueller investigation. And once again, he says it's close to being completed. Stand by. I know you're getting more information. Laura, I want to go back to Senator Mazie Hirono right now. You heard the precise statement that the acting attorney general made. I'll give you a chance to respond.
Well, this is an administration, starting with the president, who has continued to call the Mueller investigation a witch hunt. And the president handpicked Whitaker because of his comments about the Mueller investigation that comported with the president. So I would hesitate to characterize what Whitaker is saying in anything other than we shall see. At the same time, I know that in Barr, he's got another person who says that, well, even if the Mueller report is issued, that we're not so sure that that is going to be made public, that this is a candidate Barr speaking. So it remains to be seen. What I care about and what so many of us care about is that there be no effort to limit the Mueller investigation at all. And I certainly hope that in the briefing that Whitaker got, that he did not in any way indicate to Mueller that the investigation should come to a close.
It's interesting, two of your colleagues on the Judiciary Committee, Senator Blumenthal, a Democrat, Senator Chuck Grassley, a Republican, the immediate past chairman of the Judiciary Committee, they just released a bipartisan bill that would require the Mueller report to be made public. I assume you support that legislation.
Yes, I do.
Do you think it has any chance of passing? And do you think if the president were to veto it, you guys could override that veto with 67 senators?
I certainly hope so, and that would be the optimal thing. But of course, so optimal things are not happening around here, and And the fact that McConnell still has not brought the Protect the Mueller investigation bill to the floor gives me pause. But nonetheless, I'm glad that in a bipartisan way that we are asking for the Mueller report to be made public, something that Barr did not commit to, by the way, very significantly.
Have you decided whether or not you'll vote to confirm Barr as the next Attorney General?
For all the reasons that I have been articulating over the last several weeks about Barr, he auditioned for this job, and when he testified, I believe that he was testifying for an audience of one, meaning President Trump. He made sure that he would be very supportive of the president. In fact, he even said, well, I think I can understand why the president would think that it is a witch hunt. Maybe he knows some things that we don't know. Well, the underlying investigation has to do with the Russian interference with our elections, which all of our intel community said had happened. So I don't know why why Barr would think that the president has some basis for continuing to call it a witch hunt. So he's not making the Mueller report public, and he certainly didn't reassure us that he would follow the ethics guidelines about recusing himself if that's what the ethics people in the Justice Department recommended to him.
So does that mean you're going to vote against this confirmation?
I will. Yes, I was getting to it. I will not be supporting him.
Senator Hirondo, thanks so much for joining us. Up next, Senator Kamala Harris is the latest Democrat to enter the already crowded 2020 field. She'll meet Iowa voters just hours from now in a live CNN town hall. And as longtime Trump associate Roger Stone prepares for tomorrow's arraignment on charges stemming from the Russia probe, is the White House already hedging on a pardon?